watching Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Ian Calderon. He is a member of the California State Assembly. You just finished your first year. How was it, pal?
It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. It's a big learning experience.
Right.
You know, my father, I replaced him when he termed out of office. So a lot of people just assumed, oh, he must know the ropes.
Right.
And while I did have experience in terms of going up there and being
Right.
with him a lot, there's a lot to learn. And you know, you always want to be respectful of the institution and learn as much as you can to help you be as effective as you can.
So what areas have you decided to kind of take as your own? Because obviously you can't be an expert on everything. You know, I was speaking with Anthony Rendon. Of all things, he's a water expert now. I mean, I guess he was with the League of Conservation Voters, whatever it may be. But still, you can't, you know, specialize in everything. So what are you looking to?
Right. Well, I mean, it was funny because when I came in there, I was the mentality of I'm a young guy, so, you know, everything is the most important thing in the world to me. And you know, because you want to be able to make a difference in any area that you possibly can. But where I really tried to focus a lot of my attention on is, you know, the next generation and the investments that we're going to be making in our future, and specifically within the next generation, kind of cradle to career, making sure that they get the education that they need so that they can then one day get a job and be competitive in this new world economy.
So let's talk about that, because lucky you showed up just as the state's budget was turning around and we now see a surplus, which I can't believe I can say those words. I've been saying deficit for so many years, but the surplus is significant and it is real. In fact, the chief legislative analyst places the surplus higher than even the governor's predictions. And so what does the legislature do with this surplus? Is it a rainy day fund? Do you cut taxes? Do you go back and look at social services that were cut? More for education? What do you think?
You know, that's a big question, and I think as a body we all have our priorities and things that we want to see either be funded or focus on. Personally, what I think that we should do is understand that recessions are cyclical, and it's only a matter of time until it happens again. So I think it's upon us to be prudent and responsible, build up that rainy day fund so that if once a recession happens again, we're prepared for it, but also to make new investments in things that were significantly cut, but our future depends on, like education.
So how does that happen? How does that look? Because the reality is, I am sure that you are being flooded by constituencies who are saying, we were cut so dramatically over the last 5 years. You need to restore our funding, at least partially. And then you're being flooded with different calls saying, we're a high tax state. We need to cut taxes. You know, then we need the rainy day fund. So how does it all come together?
Well, I mean, there's no short of people you know, wanting the backfill of money that they were cut, and they do deserve it. But it's our job to be responsible and say, hey guys, I understand the situation that you're in, and we feel for you, but just because we have this new money doesn't mean we should go and put ourselves in a situation that you know, possibly could lead us into trouble in the future.
I believe you. I believe you. That being said, there's a lot of ways to create what we know as a rainy day fund, and you can protect it or you can make it easily accessible. So what tool or the legislature is looking at to really create a rainy day fund that truly is for a rainy day?
You know, when we got together, that was probably the one thing. I mean, I came in with a class of 38, 39 new members.
That's almost
both
half
Democrat,
the body.
half the body, Democrat and Republican. And the one thing that we all agreed on and said what needed to be our priority is that rainy day fund. And so what we did, especially within the Democratic caucus, was, you know, in order to have a rainy day fund, we have to have a constitutional amendment to the California State Constitution, because we cannot have a savings account where we carry money over and save every year. It has to be a certain percentage of the overall general fund. So we had $100 billion come into the state this year. So we say, okay, 10% of that is what our rainy day fund is going to be. So therefore, we can put $10 billion into this rainy day fund to use specifically for rainy day fund.
And one could argue that the California may be facing that rainy day with regard to the prison crisis. Because as you know, although the federal court has given some leeway to the administration as it relates to prison contraction, if in the end the state needs to keep these prisoners incarcerated in some form, but yet not within the system, money has to come somewhere to put them in private facilities out of state. That would be a perfect example.
It is a perfect example, and before we ended session, this was number one issue because of the release of 10,000 prisoners back to our locals, and we didn't want to do that because we are seeing an increase in crime. And if there's one thing that is a positive that has come from AB 109 is that at least everybody's now actually talking to each other and collaborating, which never happened before. But we are seeing increase in these small petty theft property crimes.
It's interesting. I know what you're speaking of. Recently, I think it was the PPIC came out with a study that talked about has realignment caused an increase in crime, and what they said was, as it relates to the lower level crimes, yes, not the higher level crimes. Amen to that. I mean, that could have been a little scary. So back to the rainy day fund. Do you expect to see a ballot initiative that would create a constitutional framework for the rainy day fund, or can the legislature do that on its own? I don't know.
That's something that we're working on right now, but as far as I understand, that's something that the legislature, we're doing in the legislature.
Okay, so let's talk about your successes, because there were a few. You got a few bills signed, it looks like, and it's touching. The first one's quite touching. It deals with homeless veterans.
Right.
Talk to us about that, because when I see a homeless vet on the side of the freeway, it's painful.
No, it is 100%. And these are men and women that were prepared to give all in service. And we have the responsibility to make sure that we do the same for them. And so essentially what AB 508 does is when you get a citation, generally there are 3 types of citations you'll get if you're homeless: curfew violations, loitering, or illegal lodging. Well, in order to issue that citation, the law enforcement turns it over to the courts try to find you, issue the citation. Well, in that process, they will find out if you are homeless and whether or not you are or not a veteran. Well, before this law, what would happen was if the homeless veteran had an account where there was money, they would go and just garnish the wages automatically. What this bill does is says you can no longer go and garnish the wages of that homeless veteran for 5 years. The veteran is still guilty of the offense, but it suspends the fees for 5 years, giving that veteran the opportunity to keep that money in the account to help bring themselves out of their situation.
How did this issue come to you? I mean, it's such a unique kind of specialized issue. How were you made aware that this was happening?
Well, quite honestly, California has the largest population of homeless veterans in the country.
Right.
And so I was speaking to a veterans group that had come into my office, and they brought up the issue, and we thought that was a great idea for a piece of legislation and something that should be so easy to do.
Right.
And it was actually my one bill that I had that never received one no vote.
Really?
100% from both sides voted
Congratulations.
unanimously for it.
There's another bill, I guess it's going to be coming up in the coming year, and it deals with the inspection of community care facilities. Is it a holdover? Is that what's happening with the 2-year bill?
So yes, it was made into a 2-year bill, AB 364, with unannounced visits to community care facilities. Right now here in the state of California, the Department of Social Services is only required to do one announced visit to a community care facility once every 5 years.
What's a community care facility?
So that it could be any licensed facility, any facility licensed through the Department of Social Services. So, child care facilities, senior assisted living facilities, those are types of facilities that we're talking about. And in other states, Arizona is once a year, New York is once a year, Oregon 4 times a year are these unannounced visits.
And California
is once every 5 years. And so AB 364 only required that they did it once every 2 years, bringing it down from 5, but it was a full inspection. But this bill, actually, we are going to be amending and reintroducing with new language.
Which will allow more frequent?
Yes, more frequent, requiring the Department of Social Services to do an unannounced visit to these community care facilities once every year.
What do you think? Do you think you can get this through?
I think so, because it's been in the news lately about certain community care facilities that have been on blast for certain neglect issues, abuse issues like broken bones with seniors, neglect for children in foster care homes.
Ian Calderon, I want to thank you for joining us. He is a member of the California State Assembly. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Jeff Prang. He is a candidate for Los Angeles County Assessor, also a member of the West Hollywood City Council. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
Thanks, Brad.
How many veterans are living in the United States?
Welcome back at Starter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest Jeff Prang, he is a member of the West Hollywood City Council, also a leading candidate for assessor in Los Angeles County. That election will be held in June 2014, which begs the question, elected assessor. Is that the norm in the state of California?
It is required under the Constitution of California. The assessor is elected. It is one of 3 elected countywide offices in LA County, including the district attorney and the sheriff. Last year, you may recall, the Board of Supervisors put an advisory question on the ballot, should the assessor be elected or appointed? And this was all in the wake of the scandal with the current assessor, John Noguez. And the public voted overwhelmingly to keep it as elected.
Which is fascinating in light of the fact that, as you said, Mr. Noguez has been charged criminally. So if you ever thought there'd be a time that the folks would say, oh, clearly, you know, we shouldn't have it this way. But
well, sometimes people say that I would rather make the decision than to delegate that to somebody else where the decision's one removed.
Right.
In many ways, the assessor could and perhaps should be appointed because it's really a skilled management position.
True.
And most of the work they do is administrative and could easily be regulated like another county department. But here's the one point where electing it seems to have a great deal of merit. In an economy where real estate is losing value, the assessor is obligated under the Constitution to lower your assessed value for property tax purposes. Proposition 8, that's correct. I was with the assessor's office in the early 90s, which was the first time there was actually a decrease in property values post-Prop 13. And in those days, the county was not as well managed financially as it is today. They were right on the edge of the fiscal cliff. They were going to have to cut services, and suddenly then Assessor Kenny Hahn said, I'm going to be reducing property values, which was going to have a huge impact on their already strained budget. Had the assessor been appointed in those days, no doubt in my mind,
Saturday Night Massacre.
The members of the Board of Supervisors, the CAO would have come down and said, you need to fudge that. You need to keep those property values elevated to protect our budget. But
we'll remove you if you don't.
Exactly, or take some type of retribution. And the assessor's job is to make certain that you are not paying any more in property taxes than equate to your assessed valuation. Otherwise, it would be an unfair property tax increase.
What's so interesting about Prop 8 is the assessor does not have a choice. They have to affirmatively seek out property devaluations. It's not as if you have to make an application. You can, but you are not required to. The assessor needs to figure it out first.
Part of the assessor's job is to make certain that properties are valued at fair market value or their Prop 13 value, whichever is lower, and you must do that. If you don't do that, that means a property owner could be paying more in taxes than they're required to under the law, and that's unfair.
What's also tricky for some is that if the value increases, the assessor is required, am I right?
Yes.
To bring it up to fair market value, and he can do that at a rate faster than Prop 13 allows.
Yes, if you are, let's use an example. If you
Please.
buy a house for $1 million, the declining market takes it down to $500,000. And then next year, the market takes it back up to $1 million. Your assessed value will come down to the $500,000 rate one year and go back up to the $1 million rate, which exceeds the 2% that most people who are already at their Prop 13 level. So you can always be restored up to the maximum of your Prop 13 base year.
What's also interesting, I recently moved, I purchased a home, and I moved in February, and because of the timing of my move, the property tax bills that I just paid include property taxes from my new house in the past and in the future.
Yes.
And so for those that move, you got to be careful because that first year bill, depending on the timing of your move, can be quite dramatic.
It can be very confusing because when you purchase your home, particularly in the first 6 months of the year,
that's what I did.
You purchase it and you pay off the taxes at the current level, but your tax rate changes based on your new assessment on the transfer value of your home, what you bought it for, that fair market value. And so you're going to get a supplemental bill to give you to pay the difference between the old tax rate and the new tax rate.
And I was quite confused, and I contacted someone in your office who was very helpful, so I thank you for that. And the reason I say I contacted someone in your office is because you are currently working in the assessor's office.
That's correct.
And the reason you are doing that is you were brought in the wake of, I'll call it the Noguez scandal. I mean, Mr. Noguez unfortunately was indicted. And so you were brought in to try to bring order to the department.
I've been part of the Reform Administration for about the last 18 months. I played an important role in helping assemble and organize our strategic plan, which has helped us put policies into place and set a course of action that will help us close up all the weaknesses that were revealed in the wake of the no-gas scandal, and just to set a more positive course for the future to help restore public confidence in this very important county office.
And what's interesting about the scandal is that what Mr. Nogas has been charged with, some would say, is what they would have expected anyway. This whole notion of, you contribute money to my campaign and I'll give you favorable treatment. And so how do you create the aura of, no, that is not how it works?
Well, that's not the way it's supposed to work, and the courts will determine whether or not that's what happened
Right,
with,
these are allegations.
with Mr. Nogas. But there needs to be, everybody who contacts the office of the assessor needs to be treated the same.
Right.
Everybody expects and should receive the best possible public service. They should receive answers to their questions. Whether they're donors or not donors should not have any impact whatsoever on how you are treated by the department and on your assessed value. Your assessed value is based on quantifiable facts, and the facts should always dictate our decisions.
Yeah, at a certain level, one can say a lot of things about Prop 13, but the law is very clear.
Yes.
The sales price of the home, unless...
In most cases.
In most cases, unless there's some type of devaluation. Yeah. What would other cases be, to the extent that you know, where it wouldn't be the sales price?
Well, you really hit on the two major issues. The sales price is presumed to be market value.
Right.
But if you are really clever and you get something, if you buy a $500,000 house at a steal because somebody needs money tomorrow for $250,000,
technically,
we're still going to assess you at the $500,000. We'll assess you at fair market value, not necessarily at your sales price.
There's no question that Proposition 13 continues to be a lightning rod for a lot of folks.
Right.
Some feel as if it is, really brought order to California. Others feel as if, well, it's been a good thing, it needs some reform. There is one question that seems to have created a modicum of bipartisan support, and it's on the question of legal entity transfers. It's a little complicated, but I think it was the LA Times did a whole series on the Fairmont Hotel in Santa Monica.
Essentially, this is a type of a loophole that many corporations, or some corporations, have been able to take advantage of. If a company is sold in pieces, let's say somebody owns 100% of a company, and they sell a third to 3 other people.
Right.
Even though these 3 other people constitute new owners of the hotel, the law says that somebody must get controlling interest in order to register a transfer for tax purposes. So even though the value of there should be a new value on the tax rolls, there isn't, because
is that a Prop 13
no, these
loophole?
That's a rule that's in state statute.
Interesting.
The example that you're referring to was the Fairmont Hotel in Santa Monica, where the new owner, along with his wife and business associates, each purchased a piece of the property, which was valued somewhere in the range of $20 million, and they took control of it. But because none of them had a 51% control of it, the law does not recognize that a transfer had occurred, even though the real market value of that property is now roughly $50 million. So,
and that's a huge differential.
Impact.
And so, as I understand it, even the kind of anti-tax groups believe that this is a loophole that may need to be closed.
Even the pro-Prop 13 advocates believe that everybody should pay their fair share in taxes, and that these loopholes were not part of the intent of Proposition 13.
And so as you are campaigning for this office, which some may see as arcane, but others may see as critically important, what are you hearing? What are people saying to you?
People are still, the whole no-gas scandal is still front and center. Right. People still wonder whether or not the department is, how it's being run, whether or not it's, whether it still is plagued by this corruption. Right. I can tell you as an insider that as a part of the department, that we have that the people who are affected by that controversy have been removed. Right. Policies have been put into place, and people can have a great deal more confidence that the office is operating appropriately today.
His name is Jeff Prang. He is a member of the West Hollywood City Council, candidate for assessor in Los Angeles County. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Paul Little. He is the chair of the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce. We're talking cheeseburgers. Yes, cheeseburgers. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
In 2013, what percentage of Los Angeles County's property tax roll came from single-family residential properties?
Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. If you are hungry, stick around because we are joined by Paul Little. He is the chair of the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce. He brings with him cheeseburgers. How dare you, sir? I'm hungry already. But there's a reason that the chair of the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce brought cheeseburgers today. Why did you bring cheeseburgers?
Well, two reasons.
Two.
One, because they're from Pie-N-Burger in Pasadena.
In Pasadena.
And they're always among the top 10 rated burgers in the country.
I believe it. I mean, look at them. They look absolutely delectable.
They are. But the other reason is because we're promoting Cheeseburger Week in Pasadena.
Right. Who knew that during January, Restaurant Month, we're in it right now, that over a week there is Cheeseburger Week in Pasadena? Is there Cheeseburger Week in other municipalities or areas?
Not that I know of,
Okay.
but the Cheeseburger...
Too bad for them.
Well,
Too bad for them.
But they also have... We earned the right to do that.
And let's talk about that in a second. So Cheeseburger Week in Pasadena is January 12th to the 17th. There are several restaurants that are honoring the cheeseburger or cheeseburger alternative. But there's a reason that Pasadena can rightfully claim that they are the heir to Cheeseburger Week. They're the appropriate proprietor of Cheeseburger Week. Why is that?
Well, it's because in the early 1920s, a guy named Lionel Sternberger,
God bless him.
you gotta love Lionel,
Right.
was the first person to put a piece of cheese on a burger and serve it to a customer in
Come on.
recorded history.
Come on.
It's true.
Tell us more about it. We know the location, we know the name of the restaurant, we know the price, we know it all.
He worked for his father, who had a roadside stand in
Okay.
West Pasadena called the Right Spot.
What's there now? Can you picture it? or-
Right now, there's a credit union.
Okay, fair
there.
enough, whatever.
And this was really a roadside stand. I mean, it was, a
Right.
good wind would have knocked it over.
Okay, fair enough.
And they served customers driving along what became Route 66, but
Got it.
the road between Pasadena and Eagle Rock in Los Angeles
can
and Glendale.
envision it.
And what the legend is
Yes.
that Lionel Sternberger, who was a teenager at
Right.
the time, working for his dad, burned a cheeseburger.
Or burn your hamburger.
Or hamburger,
Yeah.
burned a hamburger, and rather than toss it, put a piece of cheese on it to cover his mistake and served it to a customer who loved it.
Brilliant.
And they put it on the menu. I think it was 15 cents.
Okay.
And it was called
To add the cheese.
No, 15 cents
Total.
altogether.
Okay.
And they called it the Aristocratic Burger, and they sold it
So
for
it was highbrow.
Yeah,
It was highbrow, right.
And this was, they sold that at the place at that price. I think they may have raised it to a quarter after the war, but they sold it at that place up into the 1960s.
Do you have a sense as to how his invention creation took off? I mean, I'm just trying to think. I know McDonald's was created in this region. I think Downey or somewhere.
Bob's a Big Boy,
Bob's,
too.
oh, Bob's Big Boy. And I feel like they were serving cheeseburgers by the time they launched. Was it in the 40s or? Yeah.
They weren't launched until the 50s, 60s.
Okay, so you said
The
okay.
first McDonald's is actually out in Riverside.
Okay, and so.
Or San Bernardino.
Yeah,
out
I'm
that
not
way.
sure, right.
And no, I mean, we have. It's very funny actually
Yeah.
because we started doing this as a couple of years ago.
Right.
This will be the third one.
Perfect.
We staked our claim to the invention of the cheeseburger.
Has anyone challenged you?
Well, we had a radio host and a newspaper guy in Wisconsin. Said that can't be true.
Oh, because they're the cheese state.
Right.
Right.
He said that can't be true. Somebody find an earlier
Edition or
yeah,
right, picture,
an
photograph.
earlier
right.
something, documentation that because it must have been invented here in Wisconsin, and I actually got the ire of the entire state of Wisconsin because
that's
he
great.
he said that
Were
they
you
couldn't
getting
find
hate mail?
anything. No, they couldn't find anything.
Right.
But on their website, I
Right.
posted that the happy cows in California disagreed.
That is classic.
So they're sort of it's
Right.
actually a very fun
Right.
kind of a rivalry. Interestingly enough, the LA Times had done a story back in the 1970s. And they tried to nail down where the cheeseburger was invented. Sternberger's had 3 or 4 restaurants around, and people were saying, "Oh no, it was Highland Park. Oh no, it was here." They actually tracked it down.
They did.
The LA Times,
Right.
and there is a menu actually in the Pasadena Museum of History from the restaurant in the 1920s, and there is no earlier instance. And Hamburger America, the book. The Ultimate Hamburger Guide.
Got it.
He talks in that book about how in the 1920s people were experimenting with hamburgers. And so one of the experiments was cheese. Others were, Bob Wyan came along. 15 years later
Right.
and did Bob's Big Boy, double-decker
Right,
burgers.
of course.
People were chili
Right,
burgers,
of
all
course.
that sort of stuff. And that was all kind of part of that thing in the
Do
1920s.
you know if Lionel Sternberger has any descendants?
His brother actually is still alive out in Murrieta.
And are you in touch? I mean,
Actually, when we did the story a couple years ago,
Right.
we found out he was there. Actually, the newspaper did.
Okay.
And so we've talked. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can create some little
Yeah.
remembrance at that spot.
No doubt.
And then we'll have him come out and cut a ribbon.
and do we
all
know,
that.
are there any Sternberger restaurants still around?
No. And actually, Lionel Sternberger was better known. He weighed about 400 pounds.
Oh my, okay.
But he was better known in the early 60s because he owned racehorses, and he ran his horses at Santa Anita. He has an obituary in Time magazine that talks about him as a horse race.
Not as the inventor of the cheeseburger.
Right, exactly.
So this was great history, great fun. I'm glad you've told us this. But it does beg the question about restaurants and how absolutely pivotal restaurants are to an economy. I mentioned this to you. I recently was in Pasadena for my daughter's soccer tournament. You know, loved Pasadena. We wound up having dinner there in Pasadena. And sure enough, we walked outside and there was the Paseo Mall. And guess what? Because the restaurant was there, we walked through Paseo and, you know, $250 later, we drive home. It was the catalytic consequence of having the restaurant that got us to the Paseo, that got us to buy.
And especially in a place like Pasadena, but
Right.
anywhere, the restaurants, the basic amenity that people look for. In Pasadena, we are a visitor destination. We have a convention center, and we have the Rose Bowl, and we have big events, and we have people who come in.
But you're also pretty family friendly. I mean, you have some beautiful neighborhoods,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
and some nice middle class neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I mean, you got a lot there. So
Yeah, but what you really look for in, you know, the restaurant economy in a place like Pasadena is pivotal for a lot of reasons. One, because visitors come,
Right.
Spend money, and then maybe walk to a store or want
Right.
to stick around, or, you know, eat a couple of burgers.
Sure,
You got to
sure,
burn
sure.
it off.
Right.
But if you're looking to locate your company somewhere, you want to go someplace where your employees can get a nice lunch at a decent price, where you as the CEO can take your potential client to someplace really nice. You know, so it helps create the image of the community and the amenities, but also, like, for people that live there, it's, you know, people
Right.
come into town,
And-
you want to take them someplace.
And it's interesting because I knew you were coming on. When I was in Pasadena, I was kind of looking around and noticing the restaurants and trying to piece together, so this restaurant is here, what does it do for the neighboring businesses? And I would think that, I mean, it really is a magnet. And so, you know, I don't know how much the chamber can get involved in this, but making sure that the right restaurant is near the right business set so that the catalytic consequences can really circulate.
Well, what you notice in a lot of cases, you know, there are obviously destination restaurants, places that are a little out of the way.
Right.
Raymond,
Yes.
Raymond Restaurant in Pasadena is a great
Of
example
course,
of that.
of course.
Top chef,
Right, of
you know, in a
course.
very nice little location, a little bit off the beaten path,
Right.
but a destination. But restaurants a lot of times like to be in proximity with each other because
Is that true? They're not
Yeah.
competitive?
They are, but they're also, there's a symbiosis sort of.
Right.
What happens is, if you've got a half a dozen restaurants within an area, people will come and walk around. They, you know, and will say, oh, you know what, you know, I don't really feel like having a cheeseburger this time, but let's go get pizza.
Especially
over here.
if they're different genres. So you can have, you know, a Chinese restaurant, then maybe a Mexican restaurant, an Indian restaurant, a hamburger joint, and if they're all near each other, they can start feeding, excuse the pun, feeding off each other.
And people like variety. You know, we have, you know, my wife and I have some favorites that we go to,
Right.
But we tend not to go to the same place again and again and again and again because there is variety, but also, you know, you don't want to just eat the same thing.
Sure.
I mean, some people do.
And
but,
restaurants have fared well during these tough times?
it's a difficult business. The profit margins for restaurants are very
really?
slim. You know, so I mean, the way when the recession hit, where you would have noticed it is that it took longer to get your food because there are fewer servers.
Well, I have to thank you for joining us. I am joined by Paul Little and two of his hamburgers from where again?
Pie and Burger in Pasadena.
Pie and Burger in Pasadena. Cheeseburger Week, January 12th to the 17th in Pasadena. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.